everybody. Welcome to Beyond Labels. I'm Dr. Stina McCullough, and of course, with Joel Salatin. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different. We actually had a question that we received from a listener, from Lloyd Marchant, and he asked this question to Joel. I would like to hear Joel's comments regarding feeding grain to livestock, such as chickens and hogs. Now, I think this is such a fascinating question that I thought we'd bring it onto the show and we'd hear directly from Joel what his thoughts are about feeding grain to livestock.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for the question. And I think from a podcast persona perspective, we want to welcome questions. And look, the hardest part of these kinds of things is knowing what to talk about, right? Mm-hmm. And so questions give us a wonderful launch pad to know what's interesting to people. What are people wanting to know? And so the grain issue is such an interesting one. So first of all, I know that on this podcast we have kind of poked the grain bear, if you will, quite a bit. Sina, you're almost no grain at all, aren't you?
I am totally grain free.
Totally grain free.
Yeah, including no corn, no rice. Yeah. None at all in any products.
Well, yeah, right. Okay, so I'm not, and so the whole grain issue, is an omnivore issue. Obviously, it's not an herbivore issue. Herbivores don't need any grain at all. That would be cows and sheep and goats and llamas and alpacas and giraffes and wildebeests and bison, and there are a lot of herbivores. But as soon as you get into the omnivores, you have a very different digestive system. You drop down to one stomach, or as in the case of birds, no stomach. Birds don't even pee. I mean, isn't that an interesting thing? That's a good one to tell your trivia guests. Chickens don't pee, so they combine it, in the manure. Obviously, grains. In the wild, in the total natural wild state, grains were not grown, but that doesn't mean there weren't seeds. And so the interesting kind of the interesting question is, what's the difference between, for example, grass seeds and grain seeds? Barley, wheat, oats. So the thing about grasses is that they're perennials, and the crops that we generally grow for grain, corn, wheat, oats, barley, rye, amaranth, whatever, those are annuals. In other words, they have to be planted every year. They grow up, the plant dies. Whereas a perennial, the grass, yes, it does make a seed head, but then next year the plant continues to grow. It's a different thing. And I actually don't know what the what difference that can make, nutritionally, with enzymes, vitamins, minerals, and things like that. I don't know what it is, but a lot of the grain, the grain development was because it is so much more productive per acre than any wild seed. The wild grasses, the native grasses and things, yeah, they produced a lot of seed, but per acre, that production was limited, and it was also hard to capture. Those seeds are extremely small, and so a crop of grain, has different properties as well, for baking and all those kinds of things than just grass seeds. Where I'm going with this is that the omnivorous livestock, poultry and pigs, especially, those are the two big omnivore livestock. Those need they can't live on grass alone. So they need seeds. They need the carbohydrate, the starch that comes from seeds and nuts, including things like peanuts or walnuts or whatever. In colonial America, everybody fattened hogs on chestnuts. Chestnuts are these big, if you think about, well, if you've ever seen, like, we don't have American chestnut anymore, but Chinese chestnuts, it's a great big fat, a very carbohydrate. It's a high starch thing. And so, with the bugs and the insects, which of course are high protein, and then the starchy stuff, which were seeds and nuts, these animals survived and thrived. And in fact, historically, these omnivores, especially poultry and pork, were primarily salvage animals. So they were linked up with salvage. Prior to current mechanization in agriculture, grain was extremely expensive, because you had to till the soil, you had to plant it, you had to weed it, you had to harvest it, and then you had to try to, keep the rats out of it after you'd harvested. And so grain itself was extremely expensive. And so poultry, think about in the 1500s, for example, as poultry started coming into Europe, chickens were a luxury item. That was reserved for nobility and kings and queens and things like that. The reason is because the peasant simply didn't have the wherewithal to grow, harvest, plant, and store grain like royalty did. And the omnivores were pretty much hooked up as food salvage. Like in Italy, pigs ate the whey. In the Alps, where all in the Swiss Alps and the Austrian Alps, where the cheese was made in these high meadows, they ran the whey down to the pigs, and the pigs ate the whey. And so the omnivores got their higher carbohydrate, more concentrated dietary satiation by being salvage, dairy salvage, vegetable salvage, around the homestead. And so that's why the foundation of the human diet in those days was all herbivorous. Beef and lamb were everyday meat. If you look at Thomas Jefferson's farm book, I have it right here on my shelf, and you look at Thomas Jefferson's farm book, let's say that today we priced beef, pork, and chicken in the store. Let's say we priced them in the same ratio as they were priced during Thomas Jefferson's day. All right. A hamburger, a pound of ground beef today would cost, let's say, $8. A broiler chicken, $8 a pound. A broiler chicken would cost $30 a pound, and sausage, pork sausage, would cost $30 a pound. So, but think about that in today's grocery prices. It's inverted, isn't it? When beef prices are higher than chicken and pork, and that is a direct result of grain feeding, because of the cheapness of mechanical production of grain that allowed grain to become cheap. Grain has always been extremely expensive because it was laborious to grow. You just couldn't till and plant and store that much grain. But today, with mechanical tillage and sheet metal sheet metal storage bins, that sort of thing. Grain, for the first time in human history, since about 1910, has become extremely cheap. Well, that suddenly inverted this historically herbivore was on the peasant table, and poultry and pork were on the king's table. It inverted it now to where poultry and pork are on the peasant's table, and the beef is considered a luxury. That's a complete historic inversion of pricing ratios created by the ability to grow grain, which has essentially not been so much there's been some genetic development in that, but it's been primarily a mechanical thing. When you had to till to grow wheat, if you had to till that with that sod with a sharp stick behind an ox or a mule, you just couldn't plant very much wheat. Wheat fields were, half an acre, 3/4 of an acre, and they were too valuable to feed to animals. They were used for bread and for baking, that sort for human consumption. But today, with the advent of machinery, that's I think the thing that I'm trying to portray is that the grain, the ubiquitous grain, has been created by machinery, which allowed pork and poultry to become cheaper than the herbivore. I mean, those are two very profound things. So here we are in the 21st century. I'm a farmer. I'm raising chickens and pigs. And you can say, well, why don't we take these back to a historical normal? Let's just, in fact, right now, we're working with a farm that has a grass-based dairy who makes cheese. We sell it in our store here at the farm and ship it. And he's consented to buy, I think we gave him four or five hogs that he is raising on whey. And so this fall, for the first time, we're going to be able to offer no grain, whey-based pork. Okay, so we'll see how it goes, but you can't afford to transport that whey at his dairy down to our farm, even though they're not that far apart. Whey is primarily water. The amount of nutrition per pound is very small. One of the reasons grain is so valued is because it's easy to store because it's dry. It doesn't mold as long as you keep it dry, and it has a very long storage window. You can keep it for a long time. These whey-based pigs, we can't even raise those pigs here at our farm because we're too far away to economically transport the low nutrition per pound whey to feed. The only reason it works is because he's got a little pen up there. They're not out on pasture. They're on deep bedding. They got plenty of room and they're happy but they're not on pasture, but they're on whey. Why? Because he's got a small farm with a dairy. He doesn't want his pastures torn up with pigs. So here we've got plenty of good marginal pig pastures here to run the pigs on grass. We give them grain. With his situation, he doesn't have the pasture, so he's got them confined on deep bedding. Yes, so they're clean and they're happy, but no grass, but whey. And so to get the whole ball of wax gets pretty dicey sometimes. To get the whole option. Now there are certainly people who are trying to go with gleaning. Taking food scraps. And we've worked with many of these. In fact, we've even experimented with this and tried this over the years to get food scraps and stuff to feed pigs and chickens and things. That becomes very problematic because the dietary, because it's all different week to week. 1 week you get a bunch of this stuff, another week a bunch of this stuff. And when you're growing, when you have a diet, you need a balance of proteins and carbohydrates and the minerals and the vitamins and things like that. And so when you're using human food waste, one week you get all lettuce leaves, another week you get all bread, another week you get all squash, another, and it's extremely difficult to balance out a ration, which means one week the pigs are happy, one week the pigs are not happy, they're skinny, they're not feeling full. It's just like you or I, if we had that kind of a roller coaster diet, on our plate, on our food intake. So it's kind of, and then you have the whole, packaging and, plastic forks and spoons and the whole debris issue. That's a huge issue. We tried for about 6 months to do gleanings, and we gave it up for two reasons. One is because the human food was not nearly as nutritious as the GMO-free local grain we could get. So that's a big problem. Most of the human food scraps, I don't feed them to people, and I don't want to feed them to my pigs. And so here we got all these human food scraps that we'd love to be able to use, but they're so nutritionally poor. The pigs aren't even healthy on it. So the humans are eating stuff that won't even keep pigs healthy, or chickens. And so that's an issue. And the second issue is wrappers. Just wrapping. So then you say, well, what other alternative feedstuffs are out there? Well, one is, for example, root crops like mangels. It's like a huge tuber, a turnip. Imagine a turnip that weighs 5 pounds. Okay, big, long, like in the ground. And of course, those used to be raised a lot. But now we're back to tillage. Now we're back to tillage and a monocrop. The pigs can dig them out of the ground. They're starchy, but it's not a complete ration. It's 70%, but it's not a complete ration. So how are you going to balance it out, with a ration? The beauty of grains is every grain has a different carbohydrate protein profile. And so you can use a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of the other, and it's pretty consistent. So you can actually create a really practical, consistent diet. So you're not roller coastering your pig's nutrition, from day to day, or chicken. I mean, I don't want to make this sound like it's all about pigs. Pigs are just easier to say than chickens. So we've talked about gleaning, we've talked about salvaging, we've talked about alternative crops, and so at the end of the day, I don't think that grain is inherently bad. I think grain can be grown very well. And we now actually have wonderful work being done by the Rodale Institute, Ray Archuleta, numerous people around the world, Colin Seiss in Australia, where we're actually, for the first time really in human history, again, because we have some cool machines, we're designing machines to be able to grow crops where instead of tilling, we simply cover crop, lay down the cover crop and crimp it, and then plant into mulch. So the soil is never bare. You're actually, so I just, Ray Archuleta just told me about a guy in Indiana raising 5,000 acres. This is not a small operation, 5,000 acres of corn and soybeans, and he's doing it with no tillage, no chemicals, and no fertilizer by using cover crops as a mulch and no tillage. This is a breakthrough. I mean, it's dynamite. And so I think to say that grain is evil is to disparage a God-given foodstuff, and so then you say, well, how can we, if it has been used badly, and I recognize that, how can we use it positively, both ecologically, nutritionally, and everything else? That said, I know a guy, for example, in Kentucky who raises grain-free hogs. He's got 200 acres of woods, and he raises 10 hogs a year in those 200 acres and sells them for like $5,000 a piece. It's a niche market. In other words, his pork chops cost $100 a pound. Okay, he's only raising 10 hogs, so he's been able to cultivate a market that's willing to pay that for that grain-free pork. And I think it's great. I think it's just fine. But here at our farm, we are actually trying to create a credible alternative to the entire factory farming approach. And what by trying to explain the problems with gleaning, human food salvage, the alternative crops like root crops and things, the problems with those, I hope that people can understand that if we're going to actually the baby step to eliminating the factory farm is to first come to pasture with especially ideally produced local GMO grain stock, and move that as far as we can with that. And then if we can refine it more, let's refine it more. Now there are hogs, for example, there's two breeds from New Zealand. The Kuni is one, and they're almost herbivores. These are pigs that can almost survive on plants only, and don't need a higher carbohydrate. The problem with them is that they grow extremely slowly. They take 3 years to grow, and they're very small. Even when they're fully grown, they're not very big. So again, you have the issue of, all right, that's fine, but you're gonna sell pork chops for $50 a pound, and there are some people who can pay $50 a pound for pork chops, but not very many.
Yeah.
And so we kind of have this, this marketing / credible production / what is actually practically doable in today's climate. You have all those things with the climate, by the way, which look, everybody who knows me knows in my perfect world, I don't think even our farm, we would not raise the chickens we raise in my perfect world. And we would be raising, people simply wouldn't eat the amount of chicken that they eat. But, in my perfect world, we wouldn't pay half of our income in taxes either.
Yeah.
In my perfect world, we could, we wouldn't have to have a $1 million slaughterhouse in order to sell a T-bone steak because of food, regulations. So, we can talk about perfect worlds all day, but we don't live in a perfect world. And so we make compromises. We do the best we can within the practical realities of life. And that's where we are. That was a lot. That was a lot of talking. I was waiting for you to interrupt me with either a question or a disagreement, but you just stayed right there. So
I held my tongue. Well, I was enjoying so much what you were saying. I didn't want to interrupt, and there wasn't really a moment to. You were on a roll, so I don't ever want to interrupt you on a roll, because I learned so much. I do have some questions, and I'll keep it short, because I know we're running out of time. My first question is, well, first a comment. I didn't realize all the different intricacies that are involved in farming. So your explanation gives me a much deeper respect for what the decisions and compromises that farmers have to make. So I definitely appreciate that. I have a couple more, let's do basic questions. Okay. So the first one is you differentiated like the cows, sheep, and the goats with the poultry and the pigs, for instance. So you said the cows, sheep, and the goats, they don't actually need grains, correct?
That's right. That's
okay.
right.
So does that mean if they're growing in the wild, you know, back when they were in the wild, would they ever eat grains? Like, would they ever eat those, you know, like the seeds
Yes,
or anything?
absolutely. I can tell you that there is a period of time every summer when our grass goes to seed. Now, some fields, it depends on your grazing management. Sometimes a field doesn't go to seed. You know, like a lawn. Okay, your lawn doesn't go to seed because you never let the grass get long enough to go to seed. Okay, but if you shut down the lawnmower for a month, you'd have seed heads, you know, in your lawn. All right, so our pastures are the same way. Some of them go to seed, some of them don't. But the ones that do go to seed, there is a period of time. It's about 3 weeks, 3 week period of time in the summer when those fields, the cows go and nip. They just go in and just nip those seed heads off, just like you took nippers and nipped those seed heads off. It's when the seed heads are kind of, you know, doughy and they're not completely mature yet. And boy, they love those seed heads. So yes, absolutely. In the wild, herbivores do eat those seed heads from plants.
Okay, so that would be a short period of time. Like you said, once a year, this is about a 3 week time period on average. Okay, so let's compare that to the way that most, like cows, for instance, are raised. So most of them, the ones that are not grass-fed and grass-finished, right? They're going to be, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're going to be raised on some type of pasture, and then they're going to be sent to the feedlot where they're going to probably be fed grains. And that could be what, up to 3 months? How long is that?
Boy, 3 months would be short. Normally it's 120 to 180 days. So often they're in. So yeah, it's a 90 days would be really, really short. Normally it would normally be at least 120 days and often on up to 180 to even 200 days.
Okay, so do you think this is where we get into trouble with feeding the cows so much grain? It's that it's for an extended period of time. It's more than they're used to. Like it's an overfeeding of the grain. In addition to the quality of the grain, right? It most likely has, if it's not like organic, it most likely has glyphosate on it, which makes the grain more toxic.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it is the amount, the ratio. So even when the cows are nipping off the seed heads of the grass, that's almost like it's like a little tonic, you know. It's like a little. They're still eating primarily grass. All right, even the day that they can pick some seed heads off, they're still eating primarily grass. So it's never more than, oh goodness, you know, it's never more than just a little bit of their diet. Almost like a
condiment.
A condiment, like an energy bar. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I think that, and maybe that might be to where Lloyd's question was going about feeding the grains. So the cows, for example, in the wild would consume some type of grain, but it would be seasonally and a small percentage of the calories, compared to what we do now in this industrialized food system, with largely feeding them entirely grain-based diets for an extended period of time. And that's the most dangerous time for us as consumers, right? Because they have consumed like all their calories, right, from these grains, and right before slaughter. And so it's changed the fatty acid composition, the vitamin mineral composition.
Omega-3, omega-6, all those kinds of things.
Yeah. And so, and that's why I tell people that, like, my family never eats meat that was raised in poultry, chicken that was raised industrially. And this is one of the reasons why. Okay. So that was the cow side. Now let's go to the omnivore side with, for instance, the poultry and the pigs. So you said they need seeds. They need seeds and nuts and things like that for the carbohydrate. So let's say there's a pig in the wild, and you said like they would eat like chestnuts and things like that. Like they're on pasture, they're in the wild.
Right.
Would they do the same thing as the cows? Would they go and nibble the seeds from the grass?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, they'll eat grass as well. And they will, but they will also eat, caterpillars and worms and insects and all sorts of things. I think the main difference, what we're talking about here, like I talked about the guy in Kentucky that has 10 pigs and 200 acres. It can be done. I mean, pigs and chickens too. I mean, goodness, when we first started with our layers with the Eggmobile back, 40 years ago, we started with the Eggmobile. I only had 100 chickens in there. They basically lived off the land. I didn't feed them anything. They lived on grasshoppers, crickets, and grass seeds, and that sort of thing. But here's the problem, Sina. The problem is, it took me the same amount of time to go out, hook up with the tractor to move those chickens if there were 100 in there than if there were 2 Eggmobiles with 800 in there. And so while I'm sure I could find somebody who would pay, $30 a dozen for eggs. Okay. I'm sure there's somebody out there that would. Okay. There aren't very many.
No.
There aren't very many.
No.
And so we judiciously make compromises. It's not hypocritical if you admit it. Okay. So I'm quick to say we make compromises so that when I'm taking that half hour to go out and move them, and the diesel fuel and the tractor cost to go move them every day, I'm moving enough chickens to lay 40 dozen eggs, not just 5 dozen eggs. The compromise is I have to supplement them with grain because 800 chickens don't go out any farther on the pasture than 100 chickens. So the 100 chickens, they'll cover, whatever, 6 or 7 acres in a day. And there's enough cream there to satisfy them. But as soon as I go to more birds, my 800 birds, of course, they eat in an hour. they eat the same amount of cream as the 100 did on the same area. Chickens they don't walk a half a mile. They're only going to go so far away, and so they have this amount to go in, and so I think that that those just the practicalities and the economic realities of where we are in our day, push us into some of these compromises.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. So if I hear you right, you're saying you could actually raise pigs and chickens mimicking their diet in the wild, but it's cost prohibitive for us. Like, who's going to buy that expensive meat, right? And most of it, we're not going to buy it. That's way too expensive.
Right.
So now you've just priced yourself out of the market, right? And the business goes under.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if that became ubiquitously adopted, okay, then we would literally have whatever a 20th maybe, or even a 40th of the pork and the chicken that we have.
Well, this goes to your earlier comment about people consuming less chicken, for instance, that it would be, so you mentioned Thomas Jefferson, he did consume meat as a condiment, right? He mainly consumed a lot of vegetables. So now the prices of, the meat has gone down. It's much more affordable for many of us, especially the chickens, and especially if you're not buying organic.
Right.
So with the price going down, more of us can afford it. You can consume more of it. So it went from a condiment to almost like a mainstay, right? This is your main dish. A lot of us, our dinners are built around the meat as the main dish. But if we actually did convert back and eat it more as a condiment, and depending on the price of the vegetable, of course, there's many variables here, but you could switch back and pay for higher higher meat prices and egg prices if you weren't consuming as much of the meat, if the vegetables, countered it, right? If the price of the vegetables was a lot less than the meat.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's conceivable. Um, but I don't think there's been much research, Sina, done. There's not been much research done on in fact, to my knowledge, there's been no research done. Now, maybe there has, but I don't know about it. There hasn't been research done comparing, for example, the nutritional quality of let's just say a pastured chicken, a pastured chicken on local GMO free grains. All right. One like I would produce versus a totally, range chicken that gets no grain whatsoever, that just lives off the land. I can tell you that when we had those 100 chickens that just lived off the land and didn't get any supplementation versus the ones that we have today on the pasture that get grain, I don't think you can tell a difference. You certainly can't tell a difference visually in the egg. Okay. Now, could you actually test the difference, in a lab nutritionally? Perhaps, but I don't think that research has been done. What has been done, the research that has been done, is comparing the nutritional quality of anything on pasture, outside, sunshine, exercise, on GMO free versus factory farm, industrial confinement. That research is done. You and I both know a lot about that. That's pretty obvious. It's been done. What we haven't done is taken that alternative and what would I say, and defined it yet further, to do this other, because nobody's interested in it really, because that's such a tiny market. The big question was, are our chickens better than Tyson? That was the big question.
Yeah.
And that's been answered, and we come out smelling like a rose. But what hasn't been answered is how much better is a I'm just going to use non-supplemented, okay, a non-supplemented omnivore versus a supplemented omnivore. And if you use supplements, what difference does it make whether the supplements are root crops versus grain versus whey versus, there's a million ways to cut this. Wouldn't it be fascinating to research, those nutritional differences based on feedstocks, on the dietary feedstocks going into the herbivore? That would be amazing research, but I don't think it exists right now.
Yeah, that would be awesome. So, I'll look into the literature and see if that's been done at all. And this would be a good follow-up, I think, to this video. I did that interview with rancher Elzinga over in Idaho,
Yes.
and he partnered with a local university where they were testing the quality of his meat, and he raises his, they have cowboys there and they raise them out there in the wild. I don't believe he supplements them at all. So anyhow, I'll check back in with him, because the data may have come back about the different phytochemicals, phytonutrients in the meat, different profiles, and see if there is a substantial difference. So that would be an interesting thing. I'll follow up.
Yeah. Well, our cows are also on nothing but grass. Okay. Ever. And so, so I'm not sure, in the herbivore world, it's basically comparing grass to grain, and that's also been done. That's also been done. What I think what has not been done perhaps is comparing, for example, Idaho grass finished beef to Virginia grass finished beef, and it wouldn't surprise me if Idaho finished grass beef is better, simply because it's a more arid, highly mineralized, and the soils there were conquistadored by Europeans for 100 years 100 years fewer than ours in Virginia. We're trying to build from subsoil up, right? Yeah. And so I'd be the first to admit I'm sure there are nuances of difference, but I'm not sure how much differences those are in the omnivore with a pasture with grain supplementation versus a totally wild situation. I'm not sure. And of course, even in that, your basic feedstocks, is the grain grown on organic rich soil, or is it grown on chemical soil? There are nuances. Well, as you know, you started this, and there are nuances of nuances of nuances of nuances. And
always more to learn.
yeah. So I hope we've cracked that shell a little bit for folks, and encouraged everybody to realize that it's not just easy. And if you want perfection, if you want perfection, that has ramifications all the way down the line, and perfection is not easy, and it doesn't come cheap.
Yeah,
I think that's an honest appraisal. We're about out of time here, so we probably ought to wrap up, and really appreciate everybody tuning in and kind of trying to wrap our heads around this whole grain issue.
Yeah, and this will be the first of many podcasts. As we've just figured out, we have many more questions, and I'll dive into the research. I'll get a hold of Elzinga, see what his research is showing. But we want to thank you guys or thank Lloyd for sending in the question. And if other people have questions, feel free to email us or post it, under the video. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to answer any questions we can. All right, thanks so much. Bye-bye.